Before commercial 3D animation software existed, creating digital 3D models wasn't as simple as opening Blender or Maya and moving vertices around. You see, there was no real-time viewports, no timelines, and definitely no Ctrl Z every 5 seconds. Instead, creating a single computer-generated scene could require a full room of full expensive hardware, and programmers who understood mathematics and huge amounts of patience. And the interesting part is, this tech didn't even begin with animation. It began with scientists studying nuclear radiation. They did this using computer simulations to understand how radiation moved through materials. And this research eventually led to MAGI to develop SynthaVision. So what is this software exactly, and what made it become the earliest ray tracing systems, and how it changed 3D animation as we know it today? MAGI, or Mathematical Application Group, was the company behind SynthaVision, founded in 1996 to study nuclear radiation exposure. The mathematicians could estimate exposure at various distances and relative locations in and around fictional structures. And after a few years, the graphics team at MAGI realized that the same mathematics used to study nuclear radiation could be modified to trace light rays, which eventually led to SynthaVision, one of the first 3D computer animation and ray tracing software. So instead of using polygons or wireframe meshes, the software was using a constructive solid geometry system, or CSG, which means everything was built using mathematically defined, perfectly solid volumes like spheres, cubes, and cones. You see, animators then use Boolean operations to create more complex shapes, and MAGI used SynthaVision to create many television graphics, including educational and industrial films for clients. And the interesting thing happened when the company was hired by Disney back in 1980 to create most of the first half of the film called Tron. Since SynthaVision was good with object animations and could create fluid motion and movement, MAGI was assigned with most of Tron's action scenes, like the classic light cycle, the tanks, and also the recognizer ship scenes. But how did they really create 3D animations? Well, basically they deleted the default cube, loaded in a light cycle model, selected it and pressed G to move and set frames. Or am I kidding? Well, in many ways, it was way more complicated than that. You see, SynthaVision was not easy to work with. There was no viewport, no timeline, or anything like that. So animators had to plan out their objects and camera movements on a graph paper and manually calculate the data.
If you wanted something to go from here to here, it was literally as simple as, X is 4, now X is 6, there's 2 units, and that was that. I mean, there was just nothing else, around.
You see, each object needed 6 numbers to describe its position, X, Y, and Z transforms, in addition to each yaw, pitch, and roll to set its rotation, which means for 100 frames, you need to manually calculate and enter 600 values, and then wait for the computer to generate an image just to see if it worked. And each frame needs around 10 minutes to render, and all of that for one light cycle. At this moment, you can already tell the suffering they went through. And one of the most interesting things about Tron is that the visual style wasn't created entirely because the artist wanted it to look futuristic. I mean, somewhat they did, but a lot of what we have seen on the screen was actually shaped by the limitations of the tech available at the time. Today, if you open any 3D software, you can create almost anything you want. You can sculpt an organic creature, deform a mesh, add subdivision, paint textures, use procedural terrains, use procedural materials, and preview the result immediately. But SynthaVision worked very differently. Instead of building models from polygons as we said, SynthaVision, it relied heavily on constructive solid geometry, as you know already. This approach was extremely useful for the kind of objects MAGI needed to create. Things like vehicles, buildings, tanks, spaceships, and other mechanical objects which could be represented using simple geometric forms. But there was a major limitation. Creating complex organic shapes was much harder, and this is where the tech started influencing the art. Just look at the vehicles in Tron. The light cycles, tanks, recognizers, and other machines have a very geometric appearance. their surfaces are dominated by straight lines, sharp angles, and simple forms. This wasn't necessary because artists had no imagination. These were simply the kind of shapes that the software was good at showing. So instead of fighting the software and trying to force it to create something which wasn't designed for, the production team just embraced these limitations. And the same principle was applied to the environment. The digital world of Tron is filled with enormous geometric structures, in addition to grids, straight roads, and simple architectural forms. And these environments were perfect for computer graphics because, as you know, these could be constructed from mathematical shapes rather than require extremely detailed organic modeling. And this is something we sometimes forget, especially when looking back at older computer graphics. And now we can really tell that tech doesn't just determine what is possible, it can influence what we can do as artists, even today, we just don't know it yet. There were also limitations in rendering. You see, as a modern 3D artist, you can rely on sophisticated physically based materials, motion blur, depth of field, and countless other effects. But the artists working on Tron didn't have access to anything close to that. They had to find creative solutions to problems we can now solve with just a checkbox or node. Now let's jump from 1882 to today. Open any 3D software, and the fundamental concept is still surprisingly similar. You still need to model your objects, add and animate cameras, materials, and rendering, but almost everything around these concepts has changed. Let's take modeling for example. Most 3D software now use polygons, not CSG, and you can basically create anything that comes to your mind. The limit here is your imagination, not the software or hardware. Even basic effects were difficult back then. I'm talking about effects like motion blur, edge softening, lens distortion, and so on. Today, you basically add just a blur node, but back then, you had to reinvent the physical background, like by manually manipulating the film recording process, and the list just goes on and on. When you look at SynthaVision today, it can be tempting to see it as an extremely primitive version of any 3D software that we have today. It basically looks handicapped, but that would be missing the big picture. SynthaVision was important because it helped prove that computer graphics and computer-generated 3D animation could actually work. You see, before systems like this, computers were already being used to create graphics, but producing convincing animated 3D imagery was still, I would say, a very technical challenge. Also, looking back, it is crazy to think how this technology existed back in the 80s, yet Tron didn't actually win an Oscar at the Academy Awards, and that's because it got rejected, stating that CGI or 3D animation in this movie was kind of an unfair advantage to the other movies I mean. In other words, they basically didn't understand what they were seeing, and they thought that Tron was cheating by using computer graphics. Crazy, right? Because today, it is seen as almost an absolute necessity when making movies like this. And there you have it, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe to this channel to receive more videos like this. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.